everyone, it's Leela from Miss Kiss Creations. Welcome back to my channel. Today I want to show you how I make my acrylic paint dirty pour wood grain tumbler. I wanted to get this tumbler out to you before Father's Day because this is an easy tumbler for Father's Day for him, and it's really cheap, and like I said, it's really easy. So I have this 30-ounce stainless steel tumbler. I did purchase this tumbler from Walmart. It is Built brand. I went ahead and I sanded this tumbler down with 180 grit sandpaper, and then I wiped it down with 91% alcohol. After I did that, I spray painted it with a flat white spray paint from Rust-Oleum or Krylon, whichever one you can get your hands on. I have this old Clorox container, and I use this as my stand. I also use spray paint cans as my stand, and I know a lot of people use the paper towel racks as well. So use whatever you can get your hands on. You need something to have your tumbler sit in, and if you notice on mine, you could see there's kind of a gap between here. That's what you want. You want kind of a gap. So you don't want a snug container. You want something a little smaller than the opening of your tumbler. So for my smaller tumblers, like my 16 ounces or my 20 ounces, my old spray paint can works perfectly. And you're also going to be needing some acrylic paint. The paint that I will be using today will be posted in my description below, all the colors. But when I go to Walmart, I always go to the paint section and I just grab random colors of shades of brown, and usually white and black at the paint section, just in case when I need it, it won't be there. So I always grab random browns, and I never stick to the same color combination whenever I do my dirty pours for my wood grain. I always use something random. So if you have any other shades of brown on hand, go ahead and use yours, and it's gonna look perfectly fine, trust me. The colors I'm gonna be using today on this tumbler is going to be burnt umber, light mocha, territorial beige, nutmeg brown, and I always add a little bit of white in there just to kind of separate the browns a little bit, and if I have a little bit too many dark browns, then it just kind of lightens and gives it more contrast. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be pouring all the acrylic paints into its separate Dixie cups, and then pouring all the paints together into one big cup. So you are gonna be needing some popsicle sticks. I have my small popsicle sticks for my separate colors, and then I have my big popsicle stick for when I actually do the dirty pour. I do have a paper plate down below here. This paper plate was just used for another one, so I'm just going to reuse this. And I have spare paper plates here to the side, and I also have some paper towels and a rag here off camera. You will be needing some water to water down your acrylic paint to kind of create that pour effect. And what I do is I just poke a hole in my water bottle, just because y'all know I have a very heavy hand. So this just allows the water to come out a little bit more slower, just to make it a little easier for me. So besides the epoxy or your decal, these are the only materials that you really need. Like I told y'all, this is a very simple, easy, and very affordable tumbler. Last minute gift, this is perfect. So let's go ahead and get started on the first step. For your first step, you are going to put the acrylic paint in its separate cups, and then you're going to add some water to it. I am putting quite a few acrylic paints, a good amount of acrylic paint inside of each cup. I will warn you, with this tumbler, you do waste a lot of acrylic paint. I personally waste a lot of acrylic paint. If you think of a way to not waste as much, go ahead and do so. Some projects I'm okay with wasting, some projects I try to be more frugal about things. But acrylic paint is very cheap, and you can get it at almost any Walmart or craft store. So I like to fill up the cups about a third up with acrylic paint, and then I'm going to add the water to it next. I have my acrylic paint filled up into their separate cups, all separate, and then I'm going to drip some water into each paint cup just so I can water this down. The reason why we're doing this is because we want this paint to drip. Acrylic paint is very thick, and if I go ahead and pour this on my tumbler, it's not going to flow or drip down the tumbler. So you want the acrylic paint to thin out And the way that I thin out my acrylic paint is using water. The water I have in this water bottle is just from my kitchen or bathroom sink, and it just sits in my craft room, and so it becomes room temperature. So I'm sure you're wondering how much water I just added to each cup, and honestly, I don't know, but the way I can explain it to you is, like I said, you want this to be dripping down the tumbler. So when I add my little bit of water to my acrylic paint, I want the paint, when I lift out my popsicle stick, I want the paint to drip. So you see this is a perfect amount of water that I added to the acrylic paint, and it doesn't take a lot of water. So like this darker brown color, when I take this out, it does drip. So let me find one that might have a little less water. I think it's just darker brown. It's dripping very slowly, so I'm just going to add just a little bit more water to that. And then whenever I take out my popsicle stick, it's going to have a faster drip than before. So you see it is dripping, and that's what we want. And if you add a little bit too much more water to, let's say, the lighter brown than darker brown, whenever you combine those together, that's going to overtake the other color, so it's going to even itself out. So I hope that all makes sense for you. Don't overthink how much water you're putting into these cups. Just put enough, just a little drops, and just put little as you go, and you can always add more water, or you can always add more paint. Just make sure you have that nice drip flow. Now that I have all of my colors diluted with the water, it's now time to put them all into one cup. So you're going to take just one Dixie cup, and then what you're going to do is you're just going to pour these colors on top of each other into this cup. So I'm just grabbing any color first. It does not matter. There's no rhyme or reason for this part. I'm just pouring this on top of each other. You do not want to mix this this color or this Dixie cup. You just want to pour these colors right on top of each other. And if you see some colors going into each other, sometimes the white likes to kind of disappear whenever you pour it into your consistency or you pour it into your dump cup. It is okay, let the colors do its thing. Just pour right on top of each other. And then if you have more left over, just continue over and over again until you're out of paint. Okay, so now I have my tumbler on my little drip stand. I did not throw away my cups because I might need more paint. So I left my cups to the side. They are Dixie cups, they are paper, so they are getting a little weak, but it's okay, we can reuse them. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my dump cup, my cup that's filled with paint, and I'm just going to place it right on top of this tumbler. So I'm making sure that this tumbler is as even as I can. So I'm not like, I don't want this crooked. I want this straight as I can, because when I do the flow, I want the flow to run down as evenly as I can to make this as easy as possible. So if you have this crooked and I dump the colors, it's going to dump a little bit to the one side that it's slanted. So let's even this up, and then I'm going to take this cup and I'm just going to flip it right on top of the bottom of the tumbler. And then you're going to see the colors come down. And then what I do is I kind of circle it just to kind of make the colors run everywhere on every side of the cup. And then I lift up my Dixie cup just slowly. And you can see it running all the way down the tumbler. And I'm still kind of doing a circular motion because I want all the paints to come out of this Dixie cup. And you can see, look how beautiful that cup is. I love how the cup always looks whenever it's whenever all the paints are done. You can see all of this paint is running down the cup. And then let me spin this for you to show you how this looks, and how it being even or it being straight makes a huge difference, because I have done a lot of pours and I forget to make this tumbler straight, and then all of the paint will run to one side. So make sure your tumbler is as straight as can be, and it will have that nice flow. So if you see on top of this tumbler, you're gonna see a lot of paint on here. This is okay. This is what we want. This is what helps us create a better flow. So if you see there's a lot of plain spots around this tumbler, you can see kind of, let me show you this towards the camera. There's a lot of brown. It doesn't really look like wood grain, does it? So we want to make this look more like a wood grain. So this is when we're going to take our popsicle stick, our bigger popsicle stick, and start from kind of the edge and then push down on the bottom of the tumbler. And then we're just going to push the paint down the tumbler. And that's going to create more of that flow. It's going to take some time. It's not going to create it all at once. So please be patient with this. Don't touch your tumbler as much as you want to. Trust me, it is really, really hard. I know it is. So then we're going to turn this back around so I can show y'all this side. And then I'm going to go from the half of the tumbler, and then I'm going to push the rest of the paint down the tumbler on this side. And that's going to create another flow of the wood grain effect. And then I'm going to take the rest and then kind of keep pushing that towards the other side. And I'm not only doing this to create a better effect on the tumbler, I'm also doing this to take the excess paint off of the top of the tumbler. Because you want this paint on the bottom of the tumbler. You want this paint to be so thin so this doesn't take 4 days to dry. When I first did a dirty pour, I didn't scrape the bottom well enough, and it took 4 days to dry on the top, or I should say the bottom of the tumbler, and it only took about 10 hours for the entire tumbler to dry. So please keep that in mind. This is a very important step. Scrape the bottom. You can do it in one scrape, and it makes a nice little effect on the tumbler. So I always like to scrape and make sure I get any of the excess paints off of the tumbler, out of those little grooves if you have grooves on your tumbler, because the more paint you have on the bottom of your tumbler, the longer it's going to take to dry. So if you see, we have this nice little design, and each design is different. Each color scheme that I always use is different. So that's the best part about this. It always comes out so differently. So if you notice at the bottom of my paper plate, there's all of this paint that's dripping down, and it's making this cool effect. Let me see if I can get the camera closer so I can show y'all a better view of what's happening at the bottom of this plate. So if you see, the drip effect makes this cool effect on this paper plate. So what I like to do is I like to take my big popsicle stick and kind of scrape or collect the acrylic paint and then add it back to the tumbler. So let me show you what I'm talking about. So I have this acrylic paint here, and I'm just going to scoop it, and then I'm just going to add it back to the tumbler. And I don't always add it to the very top. I sometimes add it to the bottom. So if you see some spots right here that aren't covered with the paint, I scoop it like I do cereal or soup, and then I just add it to the tumbler, and it creates more of a design on your tumbler. So you don't want to kind of mix it. You want to kind of scoop and not mix as much. So you scoop it up, and then you just add it back to the tumbler, and it does not affect the design at all. It blends in very, very well. So this kind of allows me to fill in those blank spots. Whenever you do this and whenever you're finished with this design, you want to make sure your entire tumbler is completely covered with acrylic paint, because sometimes it doesn't cover the entire tumbler. So don't expect the colors to always drip and completely cover the tumbler 100% like here. So I always just make sure I have a full covered tumbler. And if you see like something on this tumbler that you don't like a spot, let's say right here is too brown or not enough contrast, I'm gonna go ahead and scoop that up, and then I will just add it and let that drip. And it doesn't look like much now, but over time this drip is going to fade or kind of blend in with this tumbler, and it's going to make a fabulous, fabulous effect. You're gonna see, you can already kind of see as it is now, it's kind of blending and it's kind of making that contrast, and it's looking more like that wood grain. So that's what you want. You want all those colors not necessarily mixed together, blended together, but you want that wood grain effect. So don't overthink this. I'm just scooping up some acrylic paint, and then I'm adding it to the blank spots. I'm trying to show you all on camera, but at the same time, I can't really see it. So I have to face the tumbler towards my way just for a second, and then kind of fill in these little blank spots here. And I'm just like kind of patting on the tumbler, and you can see it doesn't really affect the design because wood has a lot of knots in it, like trees, a lot of knots. It's very imperfect. So this is one tumbler that you really cannot mess up. One of my favorite tumblers to do because it's so easy and it's so quick, and it makes such a cool effect. So when you're finished with this tumbler and you are done using the paint, I just keep it like it is. I do not move this. If I go to move it from my station, I keep the bag underneath it because the acrylic paint sitting for so long, it's going to seep through the paper plate, and it might get onto your desk. It is acrylic paint, so you can easily remove it, but why create an issue when you don't have to? So I just leave this like so, and you're going to allow this to dry for about 8 to 12 hours. If it's not dry by 8 hours, it is okay, don't freak out. Wait another 3 to 4 hours and check it after 12 hours. Be very patient. The way I like to check to make sure it's dry, because this is typically the thickest part, is the bottom of the tumbler. So you just take your finger and you just tap it just like as you would epoxy. So I'm going to allow this tumbler to dry, and then once it's dry, I will move on to the next step. So I actually have another tumbler that I did last night. I use a different color scheme. It is a little lighter. So I just want to show you what you do whenever it's dried. So this has been sitting, this has been upside down for about 15 hours, and I'm just getting back to it. You see how the top did? I scraped it and it had like a funky design. I never worry about that, but this is how it's going to look when it's finished drying. So like I said, you can see they have such different looks to them. So you see how dark this one came out and how light this one came out, completely different looks. So whenever this is finished drying, you can see where the acrylic paint is from the drip effect. You can see it kind of poking through. Before I go ahead and I epoxy this, I take my X-Acto knife and I just clean up the rim, and this is basically what I do whenever I'm finished epoxying. So it's the same step that you do when you finish epoxying. So I just kind of clean up the rim, and this just takes any pieces that might be dripping. Sometimes I get a lot of drip spots. Sometimes I just get a couple like what you see here. So just a couple of these kind of drip spots. Acrylic paint is very easy to remove, and I kind of just do that just to smooth out the tumbler lid or the rim before I start epoxying. So now we're going to epoxy this tumbler. I just want to be clear, I did not seal this tumbler with anything. I didn't spray paint this tumbler with clear spray paint, nothing. This tumbler that I am touching here has the acrylic paint on here. It is just completely dried. So make sure it is completely dry before you go to epoxy your tumbler. The amount of epoxy that I apply to this tumbler is going to be very little, because all I'm wanting to do with this is I'm just wanting this acrylic paint to be locked in and to be sealed with the epoxy. That's how I am sealing this tumbler. So I just want a very thin coat. Once I apply this thin coat, I'm going to then wait 24 hours before I place a decal. Whenever I decal, then I'm going to apply that thicker coat. Once I apply that thicker coat, I am completely finished with this tumbler. The total amount of epoxy that I have is about 20 milliliters of epoxy. That's 10 milliliters of part A and 10 milliliters of part B, totaling 20 milliliters of epoxy. I will be posting my help videos in my description below if you do want to know how to mix or stir epoxy correctly. So I'm just going to spin this back y'all's way, and I'm just going to apply the epoxy to this tumbler. And I'm just making sure I'm applying an even coat of epoxy. And you can see when I apply this epoxy to this tumbler, it shines right up and it creates this beautiful shine, and it's no longer dull. So epoxy really makes it pop. And that's what I love about epoxying over this. I love seeing the transition from it being dull to this shiny tumbler.
So you just want to, again, this is just to seal in this acrylic paint, so whenever you go to put your decal on, you can have that layer of acrylic paint. If you go to put your decal on before you epoxy, you're most likely going to rip up the acrylic paint while you take up your transfer tape. So keep that in mind. You don't want to rip up your acrylic paint. You want to go ahead and take your time with this tumbler and do it right and not have to go back on steps. So the one thing that's really hard about this is I use a lot of glitter on my other tumblers, and I just got glitter all over my gloves, so I had to change my gloves. So I'm just making sure that I have an even coat, and then you're going to allow this tumbler to spin on a turner for about 6 to 8 hours. You're going to then turn off your cup turner, and then you're going to allow this to dry, air cure for a total of 24 hours, including the spinning time. The reason why I wait 24 hours, then apply my decal, is because I want to make sure that the epoxy is completely dried or completely cured, because if I apply my decal within 8 to 10 hours, that transfer tape is going to rip up the epoxy, just like how I mentioned it might rip up the acrylic paint. So be patient with this tumbler. It's going to take a couple days, but it's super easy, and it's super inexpensive, and it's perfect for Father's Day. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more tumbler and craft videos. I will see y'all next time.